"Stop now or you'll regret it." The voice cut through the afternoon silence, not from a police officer but from a man in a fluorescent vest, a crackling radio on his hip, and a makeshift chief patrol badge. He was yelling at a paramedic, kneeling, fighting to save a life. The air was thick with tension, and what happened next shocked an entire nation. This is the story of how a hero was handcuffed, a life was lost, and a $12 million lawsuit changed everything. It all began on an ordinary day in the gated community of Willow Creek, one of those places where the silence is almost tangible, broken, only by the hum of lawnmowers or the distant clink of a decorative fountain. The houses, lined up like toy soldiers, boasted pristine lawns, gleaming windows, and no parking signs that seemed to shout order at every corner. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing out of the ordinary was supposed to happen until it did. Ethan Carter, 32, a seasoned paramedic with eyes that had seen more tragedies than he cared to count, was off duty. He was sweating under the afternoon sun, helping his cousin Jake unload moving boxes from a beat-up van. Jake, an incorrigible talker, was spinning stories about his new life, while Ethan, more reserved, just nodded, balancing a box of old books. "Ever thought about taking a vacation, man? You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders," Jake teased, not noticing Ethan's slight frown. He didn't respond. Days off were rare, and Ethan knew that even then fate liked to play tricks. Suddenly a scream pierced the air, sharp and desperate, coming from the community playground a few yards away. The sound was so out of place in Willow Creek that Ethan froze for a split second, his muscles taut like guitar strings. "Did you hear that?" Jake asked, but Ethan was already moving. The box of books slipped from his hands, hitting the sidewalk with a dull thud, yellowed pages scattering like leaves in the wind. His paramedic instinct screamed louder than any rational thought, and he ran, his sneakers pounding against the hot asphalt. The playground, with its colorful swings and slides gleaming under the sun, looked like an innocent painting, until Ethan spotted the crowd forming. At the center, a nightmare. A girl about 15 years old lay collapsed on the grass, her body limp like a broken doll. Her skin, pale as wax, contrasted with the bright red of a bracelet on her wrist. A woman, likely her mother, was screaming her name. "Livia! Livia, wake up!" While a small circle of neighbors formed, some paralyzed, others muttering in panic. The Willow Creek playground, once a stage for children's laughter, was now a whirlwind of panic. Kids ran in circles, some crying, others frozen, their wide, eyes fixed on the fallen girl. A girl with pigtails, no older than 10, screamed in a shrill voice, "She fainted! I don't know what to do!" Her voice mingled with the sobs of Livia's mother, who clung to her daughter's limp hand, whispering prayers through tears. Neighbors crowded around, some trying to help, others just staring, as if the scene were a car accident impossible to look away from. The air felt heavy, laden with fear and helplessness. Ethan Carter, kneeling in the grass, had no time for the chaos. His eyes were locked on Livia, her skin growing grayer, her chest still. "Call 911 now," he ordered, his steady voice cutting through the turmoil like a blade. "Say it's a cardiac arrest, teenager. CPR in progress." A lanky teenager, clutching a phone with trembling hands, nodded and started dialing, stammering as he spoke to the operator. Ethan didn't wait. His hands found the rhythm of chest compressions, each push on Livia's chest an echo of years saving lives in ambulances and ERs. 1, 2, 3, he counted under his breath, sweat dripping down his forehead, landing on the grass. Every movement was precise, mechanical, as if the world around him had vanished. He reached for his emergency bag, a paramedic's habit that never left him, even on his days off. The bag, worn and scratched, was like an extension of him. Ethan unzipped it with a swift motion, pulling out the portable defibrillator. His nimble fingers connected the electrodes, his eyes checking the charge. "Come on, come back," he murmured, almost a plea, as he positioned the pads on Livia's chest. He ignored the chaos, the screams, the scattered footsteps, the murmurs of "what's going on" from the crowd. All that mattered was the next shock, the next chance to bring Livia back. But then the screech of tires on asphalt tore through the scene. A white SUV with Willow Creek security emblazoned in bold letters screeched to a halt a few yards away. The Willow Creek Security SUV still hummed with its engine running, the gleaming logo on the hood like a badge of power in a kingdom of perfect lawns. The driver's door, left open in haste, swayed slightly in the afternoon breeze. Out stepped Greg Thompson, the head of the community's volunteer patrol, a middle-aged man whose graying goatee and mirrored sunglasses seemed to scream, "I'm important," louder than any badge. His posture was that of someone who watched too many cop movies, chest puffed out, hands on hips, his belt jingling with a keychain that likely opened little more than a supply closet. He marched toward the playground with the determination of a general storming a crime scene, ignoring the frightened faces of the children and the muffled cries of Livia's mother. Ethan Carter, still kneeling beside the girl, didn't look up. His hands kept the rhythm of chest compressions, Livia's chest yielding under the pressure, while the portable defibrillator blinked, ready for the next shock. Sweat rolled down his forehead, mixing with the dust on the grass, but his voice came out firm, sharp. "I'm a licensed paramedic. I'm saving her life. Call the ambulance and get out of the way." He had no time for Greg's theatrics, but the security guard seemed determined to turn the emergency into a show of authority. "Get off her now," Greg bellowed, pointing an accusatory finger, as if Ethan were some random intruder. "You don't have permission to touch a resident." The crowd around them held their breath, the silence broken only by the rhythmic sound of Ethan's compressions and the crackle of the radio on Greg's belt. Ethan glanced up for a moment, his face hardened but unflinching. "This is a cardiac arrest, not a traffic violation," he shot back, his voice laced with a sharp calm that contrasted with the surrounding panic. "If you want to help, grab that radio and confirm the ambulance is on its way." But Greg, his ego bruised, took a step forward, his shadow blocking the sun. "This is private property," he roared, as if the words were universal law. "You're not on the visitor log, and I don't know who you are. Step back, or I'll remove you by force." The neighbors began to murmur, some shocked by Greg's audacity, others torn between fear of the local authority and the urgency of the situation. Livia's mother, her face streaked with tears, screamed, "Let him save my daughter." But Greg, oblivious to the desperation, reached for his belt, his fingers hovering dangerously close to a pair of gleaming handcuffs. Ethan, sensing the tension escalating, prepared the defibrillator for the shock, his eyes meeting Livia's still closed, as if begging for one more second. He knew every interruption was a gamble against her life, and Greg was about to make everything much worse. The afternoon sun scorched the Willow Creek playground, the heat reflecting off the asphalt and turning the air thick, almost suffocating. The portable defibrillator beside Ethan blinked, its mechanical voice cutting through the chaos with cold indifference. "No shockable rhythm. Continue CPR." Ethan didn't hesitate. His arms resumed the rhythm of chest compressions, muscles taut, his face glistening with sweat as he counted mentally, each push on Livia's chest a battle against time. The girl remained motionless, the pallor of her skin a cruel reminder that every second mattered. Livia's mother, kneeling a few feet away, clutched a rosary, her lips trembling in a silent prayer as tears streamed down her face. But Greg Thompson, the head of the volunteer patrol, wasn't interested in medical emergencies. He stood planted in front of Ethan, legs spread like a B-movie sheriff, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the chaos around him. "You're violating HOA rules," he shouted, his voice shrill, as if bureaucracy could stop death. "Unauthorized. Medical practice. Stop now or I'll detain you." His fingers gripped a pair of nylon zip-tie handcuffs, which he brandished like a weapon, the black plastic glinting in the sun. Ethan, without pausing his compressions, glanced up for a moment, his eyes filled with exasperation and something close to contempt. "Want to argue rules while she's dying?" He shot back, his voice hoarse but steady. "Get out of here now." Greg, his face red with rage, looked like a volcano on the verge of erupting. "Last chance, stranger," he bellowed, stepping forward, the zip ties snapping in his hands. The word stranger sounded absurd in a community playground, but Greg pronounced it with the conviction of someone defending a fortress. The crowd, now larger, formed a ragged semicircle around the scene, a mosaic of shocked, curious, and outraged faces. A teenager in a band t-shirt held up a phone, filming everything with a shaky camera, while a middle-aged woman whispered to her neighbor, "This is insane, he's trying to save the girl." Others, however, hesitated, conditioned by blind respect for Willow Creek's rules, where even the size of trash cans was regulated. The crowd's murmurs grew, punctuated by muffled shouts and the cry of a frightened child. "Let him work!" yelled a man in a baseball cap, but his voice was drowned out by the crackle of Greg's radio, blaring an unintelligible message. Ethan, oblivious to the circus, checked Livia's pulse again. Nothing. He adjusted his hands, the rhythm of his compressions never faltering, but Greg's shadow loomed over him, a dangerous distraction. Livia's mother, unable to contain herself, staggered to her feet and pointed at Greg. "You're going to kill my daughter with this nonsense," she screamed, her voice breaking. Greg, caught off guard, hesitated for a second, but quickly resumed his authoritarian stance, the zip ties still in hand. Ethan knew Greg's next move could cost everything, and the distant sound of a siren, still faint, was the only hope that time was on his side. The Willow Creek playground, now a stage of chaos, seemed trapped in a nightmare where time slowed. But tragedy accelerated. Ethan Carter, his arms burning from pressing on Livia's chest, kept the rhythm of chest compressions, each movement a silent plea for her heart to beat again. The portable defibrillator beside him blinked, its green light reflecting on the grass, but its mechanical voice remained silent, as if it knew the next moment would be decisive. The crowd, a sea of shocked faces and halting voices, watched with her mix of horror and helplessness. Livia's mother, on her knees, clutched her daughter's arm, murmuring her name between sobs as the distant sound of a siren began to grow closer, still painfully slow. Then the unthinkable happened. Greg Thompson, his face contorted with rage and blind authority, decided that rules mattered more than lives. In the middle of a series of compressions, he grabbed Ethan by the shoulder with the force of someone who thinks they're in charge, his fingers digging into the paramedic's sweat-soaked shirt. "You're under arrest," he roared, yanking Ethan backward with a violent tug. Ethan's body lost balance, and he fell onto the grass, the impact reverberating through his bones. Before he could recover, Greg knelt on him, the guard's weight crushing the air from his lungs. With a swift motion, he secured the nylon zip ties around Ethan's wrists, the plastic biting into his skin. "You don't call the shots here," Greg shouted, his goatee trembling with fury, his sunglasses slipping to the tip of his nose. The silence that followed was shattered by a visceral scream. "He was helping, you're crazy," yelled a mother in the crowd, a woman with curly hair holding a frightened child in her arms. Her voice sparked a chorus of protests. A boy about 14 with a backpack slung over his shoulder tried to push Greg, shouting, "Get off him!" But Greg, with a brusque motion, shoved the teenager back with his forearm, causing him to stumble onto the grass. The crowd erupted in outraged murmurs, phones recording every second, their lenses capturing the absurdity of a paramedic in zip ties while a girl lay dying a few feet away. The defibrillator, abandoned beside Livia, blinked uselessly, its green light now a symbol of lost hope. Ethan, pinned to the ground, felt Greg's weight like an anchor, but his eyes were fixed on Livia. Without the compressions, her chest remained. Still, the pallor deepening as if life were slipping into an abyss he could no longer reach. The 7 minutes that separated the chaos at the Willow Creek playground from the police's arrival felt like an eternity. The sound of the siren, once a distant promise, finally burst through, cutting the hot afternoon air with an urgency that arrived too late. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt on the community street, their red and blue lights flashing against the pristine house facades, while an ambulance parked alongside, its doors flung open with a bang. Paramedics rushed toward the playground, carrying kits and a cardiac monitor, but the silence hanging over the scene already told the story. Livia, motionless on the grass, no longer responded. Her mother, clinging to her daughter's body, sobbed with a despair that made even the hardest hearts clench. Ethan Carter remained on the ground, his wrists still bound by the nylon zip ties, the plastic cutting into his reddened skin. His medical bag, knocked over during the confrontation, lay a few feet away, its contents scattered across the grass. Gauze, syringes, a broken stethoscope. He didn't move, his eyes fixed on the portable defibrillator, now silent, its green light extinguished, like a lighthouse that had lost its way. The crowd, still gathered, murmured in tones of revolt and grief, some pointing at Greg Thompson, who stood tall, chest puffed out, as if he had just saved the day. Phones kept recording, capturing the absurdity of a paramedic in restraints while a 15-year-old girl lost her life. 2 officers stepped out of the cruiser, their uniforms pristine against the playground's chaos. The older one, a man with grey hair and weary eyes, spotted Ethan on the ground and furrowed his brow. He approached, crouching to pick up Ethan's wallet, which had fallen during the scuffle. The paramedic license, laminated and worn from years. Fear of use was visible, with the name Ethan Carter in clear letters. The officer held it for a moment, his eyes scanning the document, before turning to Greg, who stood with his arms crossed in stubborn confidence. "You zip-tied a paramedic?" "During CPR?" the officer asked, his voice low but laced with disbelief, as if trying to process the sheer stupidity of the situation. Greg, his sunglasses still perched on the tip of his nose, raised his chin. "He didn't have authorization to be here," he declared, his voice firm, as if reciting a rule book. "Rules are rules. This is private property, and he wasn't on the visitor log." The crowd reacted with an indignant murmur, a woman shouting, "Authorization! She was dying!" The officer shook his head, a slow gesture mixing contempt and exhaustion. Without a word, he pulled a pocket knife from his belt and cut the nylon zip ties, freeing Ethan. The plastic fell to the grass, and Ethan rubbed his wrists, his face hardened, but his eyes betrayed an emptiness words couldn't describe. He stood, his knees shaky, and his gaze went immediately to the white sheet the newly arrived paramedics had placed over Livia. The fabric, light and cruel, covered her body, erasing the red bracelet Ethan had noticed earlier, erasing the girl he had fought to save. Livia's mother, now surrounded by 2 neighbors trying to console her, let out a muffled scream, as if the sheet were the final confirmation of her worst nightmare. That night, as Willow Creek tried to return to its artificial calm, the now empty playground bathed in the dim glow of streetlights, a digital storm was gathering momentum. A teenager, the same boy in a band t-shirt who had filmed the confrontation with a shaky phone, posted the video on X with a caption that cut like a knife. "HOA patrolman arrests paramedic, girl dies." The 2-minute and 30-second clip captured everything. Ethan Carter, sweating and desperate, pleading to continue CPR. Greg Thompson, with his crooked sunglasses, shouting, "You're not authorized," while brandishing nylon zip ties. Livia's mother in tears, attempting compressions with trembling hands, and the white sheet covering the girl's body, an ending that silenced any hope. Within hours, the video exploded, reaching 15,000 shares, the numbers climbing like wildfire through dry grass. Social media erupted. On X, hashtags like #Justice for Ethan and #EndHOAs dominated the trends, accompanied by furious comments. "This is what happens when petty HOA power thinks it's the law. A girl died because of an idiot with plastic zip ties. Ethan is a hero. Greg is a villain." On Instagram, memes mocking Greg, with his goatee and sheriff pose, spread rapidly, while TikTok reaction videos showed influencers crying as they recounted the tragedy. Reddit discussion groups dissected every frame, highlighting Greg's callousness and Ethan's courage, with threads racking up thousands of upvotes. The outrage was palpable, a wave of collective anger that crossed cities, states, and even countries. By midnight, national news outlets had picked up the story. CNN looped the clip, with anchors debating the overreach of authority in gated communities, while images of Willow Creek, with its pristine lawns and decorative fountains, played in the background. Fox News interviewed a lawyer speculating about Greg's civil and criminal liability, while MSNBC brought in a psychologist to discuss the trauma of Livia's mother. Each network replayed the most shocking moment. Greg pulling Ethan from the ground, the zip ties snapping, and Ethan's hoarse voice pleading, "She needs CPR now." Online newspapers like the New York Times and Washington Post published articles with headlines such as "Tragedy in Gated Community Exposes Clash Between Rules and Lives," and "Paramedic Handcuffed, the death that shocked America. In Willow Creek, the houses remained dark, but windows glowed with the reflection of phone and TV screens, residents following their own tragedy as if it were a distant drama. Livia's mother, devastated, refused interviews, but a photo of her clutching her daughter's red bracelet taken by a neighbor circulated online, breaking hearts. Ethan, exhausted, was in his apartment, wrists still marked by the zip ties, watching the coverage with a cold cup of coffee in hand. He didn't want to be a hero, but the internet had made him one. Greg, meanwhile, had locked himself in his house, curtains drawn, as hate messages flooded his social media. The story, now bigger than Willow Creek, was just beginning, and the weight of truth and justice was starting to take shape on the horizon. Ethan Carter never wanted the spotlight. The fame the viral video brought him, thousands of messages calling him a hero, montages with his photo alongside hashtags like "Justice for Ethan" felt like a burden, not a crown. He hadn't slept properly since the playground, the white sheet covering Livia haunting him every time he closed his eyes. What he wanted wasn't applause, but justice. For Livia, for her mother, for himself. Sitting in his apartment, wrists still sore from the zip ties, he picked up his phone and called the one person he knew could turn his anger into action: his sister, Olivia Carter. Olivia, a 35-year-old civil rights lawyer, was a force of nature, known for taking on corporations, governments, and any institution that trampled on the vulnerable. Her name appeared in headlines for dismantling discriminatory policies and exposing abuses of power, always with a sharp gaze and a voice that never wavered. When Ethan, his voice weary, recounted what happened at the playground, Greg's shouts, the zip ties, the moment Livia slipped into death, Olivia stayed silent for a long moment. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, the sound of someone holding back a storm. "They're going to pay for this, Ethan," she finally said, her voice low but laced with a certainty that made his chest tighten. "We're going to tear this system down, piece by piece." The next day, the sun blazed over the steps of the community hospital where Ethan had been treated for the cuts on his wrists, the nylon marks now covered by white bandages. Olivia, dressed in a navy blazer and thin-framed glasses, organized a press conference that drew reporters from across the state. Microphones from outlets like CNN, NBC, and local channels formed a semicircle around her, while cameras captured every word. Ethan stood beside her, his eyes sunken, his posture rigid, as if the weight of the playground still crushed him. Behind them, a makeshift banner, created by Willow Creek neighbors, read, "Livia deserved to live." The crowd, made up of residents, activists, and onlookers, held signs with phrases like "Rules kill" and "Justice for Livia." Olivia raised her chin, the wind gently stirring her hair, and began to speak, her voice clear and sharp as a blade. "My brother Ethan Carter, a licensed paramedic with 10 years of experience, was prevented from saving a life at the Willow Creek playground," she declared, her eyes sweeping over the reporters as if daring them to disagree. The Willow Creek HOA, through its volunteer patrolman Greg Thompson, placed petty rules above a dying teenager. They zip-tied Ethan while he performed CPR on Livia, a 15-year-old girl who could be alive today. This isn't just negligence, it's an immoral and legal failure. We are suing them for $12 million, and we won't stop until this abusive power structure is dismantled. The crowd erupted in applause, some shouting "Justice," while others raised their signs higher. Camera flashes fired, capturing Olivia's determined face and Ethan's distant gaze, unable to look away from the banner with Livia's name. On social media, the live stream of the press conference reached tens of thousands of views, with comments like "Olivia is a legend" and "The HOA is going down" flooding X. In Willow Creek, the houses remained quiet, but the air was thick with tension, as if the neighborhood knew the battle was just beginning. Ethan, his wrist still aching under the bandages, squeezed his sister's hand, feeling for the first time since the playground a spark of hope, not for himself, but for Livia, whose story now echoed across the world. At the heart of Willow Creek, the glass-walled office of the Homeowners Association, HOA, was a symbol of control, with spotless windows and bronze plaques proclaiming order and community. But that morning, the space was far from its usual serenity. The blinds, normally open to showcase the community's perfection, were half closed, as if trying to hide the chaos taking hold. Margaret Heller, the 58-year-old HOA president, with impeccably styled grey hair and a history of micromanaging everything down to the height of neighbors' shrubs, called an emergency meeting. The air conditioning hummed, but it couldn't dispel the heat of the crisis engulfing the room. Margaret, seated at the head of a polished mahogany table, tapped her pen against a notepad, the rhythmic sound betraying her nervousness. Around her, 7 HOA board members, middle-aged men and women with expressions ranging from fear to indignation, flipped through reports and exchanged uneasy glances. A laptop screen displayed X, where the playground video now surpassed 2 million views, with hashtags like Jar End HOAs and Jar Justice for Livia dominating the trends. "We're not responsible," Margaret insisted, her voice high-pitched, almost breaking. Greg followed security protocol. He acted to protect our community. "We're not a police force, we can't predict emergencies." But her words sounded fragile, like a paper wall facing a storm. The blow came hours later when a dissenting board member, identified only as Robert M. on social media, leaked a series of internal HOA emails to an investigative journalist. The documents, quickly spread on X and covered by outlets like the Washington Post, painted a damning picture. An email from Margaret, dated 3 months earlier, stated with cold bureaucracy, "No one enters without verification, even in emergencies. Control is security. Any deviation threatens our order." Another, written by Greg Thompson just at ETA, week before the tragedy, was even more blunt. "If they're not on the visitor list, they're intruders, period. I don't care if they're carrying a stretcher or a badge." The court of public opinion had already convicted the Willow Creek HOA, but Olivia Carter was determined to deliver justice in actual courtrooms. Armed with the leaked emails from Robert M., she turned Margaret Heller's and Greg Thompson's cold words into lethal ammunition for the lawsuit. In court filings, Olivia accused the HOA of wrongful detention, obstruction of medical emergency, and fatal negligence, arguing that their draconian rules cost the life of Livia, a 15-year-old girl who could be alive. The press, always eager for gripping headlines, dubbed the case the murder by protocol, a phrase that echoed in headlines from the New York Times to BuzzFeed, turning Willow Creek into a synonym for deadly bureaucracy. Every article featured the same image, the white sheet over Livia, a symbol that broke hearts and fueled collective rage. While Olivia prepared for the legal battle, Ethan sought redemption in a more personal gesture. He wanted to speak with Livia's parents, Clara and Michael, to offer condolences and perhaps find a sliver of peace. For days, his messages were met with silence, the parents' grief an impenetrable barrier. Finally, on a grey afternoon, Clara called, her voice fragile but firm. "Come, we want to meet you." Ethan arrived at their home, a modest residence in Willow Creek with a volleyball net set up in the backyard, now covered in dry leaves. Clara welcomed him in the living room, holding a framed photo of Livia, smiling in a volleyball uniform, her hair tied back in a ponytail. Michael, a broad-shouldered man with sunken eyes, stood beside her, his hands restless. "Do you think she had a chance?" Clara asked, her voice trembling, her eyes fixed on the photo. Ethan swallowed hard, the memory of the playground hitting like a punch. "Yes, I think so," he replied, his voice low but honest. Michael extended his hand, gripping Ethan's tightly. "Don't let this be forgotten," he said, each word heavy with pain and purpose. Beyond the walls of Willow Creek, the outrage was taking physical form. Protesters began gathering at the community's gates, holding signs with phrases like "CPR isn't a crime" and "Justice for Livia." A group of local paramedics, in solidarity with Ethan, left a row of CPR mannequins at the main entrance, each painted with a bright red heart, a silent protest that appeared on every news broadcast. On X, photos of the mannequins went viral, with comments like, "This is what heroes do, HOA," and "Livia deserved to live." Olivia, sensing the moment, expanded the lawsuit, naming Margaret Heller and Greg Thompson as individual defendants, accusing them of direct responsibility for the tragedy. The news landed like a bombshell, and the hashtag #ArrestGreg shot to global trends. Inside Willow Creek, the community was fracturing. Some residents loyal to Margaret defended the HOA with flimsy arguments, fearing that bad publicity would devalue their properties. "Without rules, it's chaos," one woman said at a community meeting while others nodded nervously. But the majority, moved by Livia's death and the leaked emails, demanded change. Homemade signs, "Margaret, resign," and "Out Greg," sprouted in yards, defying the neighborhood's perfect aesthetic. Greg, cornered, gave an interview to an obscure news channel, his face red under the studio lights. "I protected the community," he insisted, his goatee quivering. "That guy was a stranger. We didn't know who he was." The tragedy of Willow Creek reverberated far beyond the community's gates, reaching the corridors of power. The Department of Justice, pressured by public outrage and the viral video of Livia, announced a national investigation into the security practices of homeowners associations, focusing on abuses of authority by volunteer patrols. The news, splashed across headlines like "DOJ targets HOAs after teen's death," reignited the debate on social media, with the charge of justice for Livia trending again on X. Meanwhile, a state senator, touched by the story, proposed the Livia Law, a bill that would prohibit private security from interfering in medical emergencies, mandating training and imposing harsh penalties for obstruction. Protesters outside the state capitol held signs with Livia's smiling photo, her volleyball uniform now a symbol of the fight, while her mother, Clara, watched from a distance, clutching her daughter's red bracelet. While the world demanded change, Ethan Carter tried to rebuild his life. He returned to work as a paramedic, despite the trauma that woke him in cold sweats, Livia's face etched in his mind. On his first call after the playground, he responded to a car accident on the highway, where a middle-aged man was bleeding, trapped in the wreckage. With steady hands, Ethan stabilized the patient, applying a tourniquet and monitoring vitals, until the ambulance arrived. When the man, conscious, squeezed his hand and murmured, "Thank you," Ethan felt a visceral relief, a reminder of why he kept going, despite the weight of failure. But at night, alone in his apartment, the guilt returned. He saw Livia, her pallid skin the white sheet, and wondered if he could have done more, even knowing Greg had stolen his chance. The cold coffee on the table and the faded marks on his wrists were constant reminders. In the courtroom, Olivia Carter conducted the case like a maestro of a symphony of justice. The courtroom, with its wooden walls and benches packed with reporters, and Willow Creek residents buzzed with tension. Olivia presented an arsenal of evidence, the playground video, now with 5 million views, showing Greg zip-tying Ethan, testimonies from neighbors shouting, "Let him save her," and the leaked emails with Margaret's words, "Control is security," projected on a screen, drawing gasps from the jury. An unexpected witness, Lisa Reynolds, a 42-year-old, former patrol volunteer, took the stand with tense shoulders. She revealed that Greg conducted trainings based on YouTube videos, teaching detention tactics that seemed ripped from a low-budget action movie. "He told us we were the guardians of Willow Creek," Lisa said, her voice shaky. "He spoke as if we were at war." The jury, visibly horrified, exchanged glances, while reporters scribbled furiously. Olivia then called a renowned cardiologist, Dr. Alan Kessler, who delivered the final blow. The compressions interrupted by Greg reduced Livia's chances of survival by over 80%. "Every second without CPR is critical," he explained, pointing to graphs projected on the screen. Ethan's intervention was her only hope. The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret Heller, called to the stand by the defense, tried to justify herself, but her evasive answers betrayed her. When Olivia asked, her voice sharp as a blade, "Did you prioritize rules over lives?" Margaret stammered, her glasses slipping down her nose. "It's not that simple," she mumbled, her face flushed. Olivia didn't hesitate. "It was simple for Livia," she shot back, pausing to let the words echo. "She needed oxygen, not a badge." The jury leaned forward, and even the judge seemed shaken. The HOA's defense, sensing imminent collapse, offered a $1.5 million settlement, hoping to buy silence. Olivia, her eyes blazing with determination, rejected it on the spot. "This isn't about money," she declared, facing a packed courtroom and live cameras. "It's about changing a system that kills. It's about ensuring no other Livia falls victim to blind rules." The crowd outside the courthouse, now swelled by paramedics and activists, erupted in applause. The CPR mannequins with red hearts still lined up at Willow Creek's gates like sentinels of Livia's memory. Ethan, seated in the gallery, felt the weight of the moment, but also the strength of Michael's promise. Don't let this be forgotten. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, justice felt within reach. The verdict came after 3 days of deliberation. The Willow Creek HOA was ordered to pay $12 million in damages to Ethan, with an additional $3 million for intentional negligence. Margaret was personally liable for $500,000, and Greg faced criminal charges for obstruction and false representation of authority. The judge ordered the immediate dissolution of the security patrol and mandated state-supervised training for any future security team. Greg was arrested days later, found hiding in a trailer. His arrest was televised, and he said nothing as he was led away. Willow Creek residents voted to replace the HOA board with a group of volunteers, including a retired firefighter. A memorial for Livia was erected in the playground, with a plaque, "Livia, your light will never fade." Candles and flowers piled up daily. Ethan used part of the settlement money to create the Livia Foundation, which trains communities in CPR and advocates for laws to protect first responders. Olivia became its legal counsel, and together they traveled speaking at schools and communities. At one talk, a boy asked Ethan, "Have you ever given up?" Ethan smiled. "Almost. But then I remember Livia, and I keep going." The question stayed with him, a reminder that the fight was worth it. The Livia law was passed months later, establishing federal penalties for interfering with first responders and requiring oversight for private security. Ethan testified before Congress, his voice resounding, "No one should be handcuffed for saving a life." The room applauded, and the bill became a landmark. In Willow Creek, property values fell and the community never regained its former glory. But for Ethan, the true victory was knowing that Livia's sacrifice sparked change. A year later, Ethan attended a candlelight vigil for Livia, organized by her parents. Clara hugged him and said, "You gave her a voice." Ethan lit a candle and stood in silence watching the flame dance. He knew the fight didn't end there. It was bigger than him, bigger than Livia. It was about ensuring no first responder hesitated, fearing handcuffs instead of saving a life. And as the candles glowed, Ethan felt for the first time that the world was beginning to heal.